Well, we're now just 148 days from Election Day, and Joe Biden, he's doing something that Hillary Clinton never managed to do back in 2016. The former VP, he's now hit 50% support when you look at an average of polls conducted over the past week. Donald Trump's average, it's at 42%. And in one new poll from CNN, it's got Biden surging to a 14-point lead over Trump. At the same time, the president's approval rating has fallen into just the high 30s. And now it's looking like the Senate has a real chance to turn blue in November. First of all, Republicans, they're defending 23 states, Democrats just 12. And my next guest, she wrote a piece in RealClearPolitics saying that Trump, he's an albatross for at-risk members of the GOP. She points out that incumbents in Arizona, Colorado, North Carolina, Maine, for example, they're in the most danger, and things are very tight in places like Iowa and even Georgia. Associate editor at RealClearPolitics, A.B. Stoddard. She joins me now. And A.B., I think you wrote that piece 2.5 weeks ago, and just think even what's happened in the interregnum. I mean, we obviously saw the George Floyd tragedy, a lot of criticism on how the president's handled the aftermath. A lot of people who've normally stood with him on many things, openly questioning him given his threat to use the military against Americans who dissent, and yada, yada, yada. I keep going down the line here. Odds makers, I would say, would you disagree with me, would put it as better than 50-50 if things were all equal today, that Republicans actually lose the Senate.
Yeah, I was surprised to see just a day or two ago, Jessica Taylor, the Senate analyst for the Cook Political Report, say she would rather be Democrats than Republicans. If you look at the forecast right now, it was sort of a toss-up when I filed that piece, and things have worsened. Why have they worsened? Because not only are the four states you mentioned, Maine, Colorado, North Carolina, and Arizona, really toss-ups. It's looking terrible for those four incumbents. Joni Ernst in Iowa has things to worry about now. You look at 2 seats up in Georgia, and then you look at Montana. So after those first 4 toss-up races I mentioned, you're looking at 5 seats. Montana, the latest, where a great candidate gets in, Governor Stephen Bullock, forcing Republicans to already spend $20 million on the incumbent Republican Senator Steve Daines there. My final category is the spend, headache category, which means is Mitch McConnell likely to lose Kentucky, John Cornyn in Texas, or Lindsey Graham in South Carolina? No, but they will have to spend resources, precious, dwindling, limited resources on people like that. So if you add those 9 seats they're defending to a growing list of other seats in which they're going to have to spend precious resources, the challenge is incredible. And then you meet that with the tanking poll numbers of President Trump. And it's more than an albatross that I said it was 2 weeks ago.
And I look at the landscape of things that we know are potentially on the horizon here, and who knows where COVID goes from here. And certainly we didn't even talk, we couldn't have even forecasted a few weeks ago the George Floyd story and how that has changed the American narrative. But AB, you've got a lot of people that are slated to lose their health care, unemployment, stimulus, the threats not to give state funds here. A lot of people are going to be in a worse position than they are right now, conceivably, in the next 30 to 60 days. And it was Republicans who'd have a choice whether to extend some of these benefits or not. They're going to have to own that. My point is, even the calendar's not in their favor.
Richard, that's such a good point. And I was emailing with a Republican congressman today about that. Just because we saw that really great surprise jobs report a few days ago doesn't mean the layoffs have ended, doesn't mean without AIDS relief to local and state governments that you won't see a slew of layoffs to nurses, sanitation workers, cops, teachers, firefighters, government jobs that are going to cause incredible pain. The healthcare issue is number one to voters. It's why Republicans lost in 2018. They still have done nothing about it. A huge political liability for them. Then you have a pandemic. And so people are not only healthcare insecure before the pandemic, then it's worsened by COVID-19. Then you have, as you point out, people who've lost their employer-based coverage because they've been laid off. And it's a very difficult place for Republicans to be right now to say they're not interested inducing this very, very difficult recovery with more relief. There's no guarantee that everything President Trump promised after that job report on Friday is going to continue along. And incumbents know this. They've also looked at the incredible shift in polling after George Floyd's death, which finds a total rethinking on excessive force and police brutality. No one wants to defund the police in the majority of America, but you're finding in polling a huge shift about the need for police reforms. And so that is, again, an issue they're going to have to answer to. It's going to be hard for them to walk off a pro-cop, anti-cop, kind of contrast that the president is pushing. It's a very tough place for Republican Senate incumbents to be. And I think also for people like Joni Ernst and Mick Sally, two Republican senators who've served our armed forces, and given, the great sacrifice to do so, having to answer to all the criticism they're hearing of President Trump from General Mattis down the line in the last 10 days, just a really awful place for Senate incumbent senators to be.
And I think you wrote at length about the issue of voting and mail-in voting, and it's such a joke when you look at. There are states in this country that's the only way, in many cases, they vote, and certainly people like the president can mail in vote. But forgetting the efficacy of what's right or wrong, it's very conceivable this fall and into November, we could have another spike here. And we saw what happened with Wisconsin and how moronic that was. We forced people out in the middle of a pandemic, and we know dozens got sick consequently. That we could be doing this all over again, and they're going to blame the Republican Party for this that has opposed this. But as you write, some Republicans, secretaries of state and even lawmakers, they've broken from the president on this because they know this is bad news for them. To that end, I thought it was interesting that Collins wouldn't show up in the same zip code as Trump when he went to Maine. We saw what Murkowski had to say, and we also obviously saw Mitt Romney protesting along with other folks this weekend. Do you think that after the primaries are done and the president can't threaten to run somebody against a Republican who breaks ranks, we'll be surprised by how many Republicans who will say, I'm not so sure I'm going to vote for this guy come November, especially if you're like a Gardner or, another Republican senator who's losing by double digits right now. What do they have to lose?
Right. That's an interesting question because Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska, a former, vigorous Trump critic, went silent for about a year and a half. And he just won his primary. And he came out, of course, last week after the debacle at Lafayette Square and said that the president used the word of God for a photo op and really, jumped all over the fact that those peaceful protesters were gassed for him to go hold a Bible in front of St. John's Church. It was one of the more critical comments of the comments that were made by Senate Republicans in the last 2 weeks. But yes, what they're going to have to calculate is this. If they're looking at their polling and the economy does not bounce back, we don't have a vaccine by early days of October. There is no miracle recovery, and there's no distraction. There's no way to get rid of the mess that President Trump has gotten himself into in polling and disapproval. Then you'll likely see them more independent, thinking, if I'm going to lose my seat, at least I'm going to speak out for myself. And I'll go down that way with him tweeting about me. They're thinking now it's early days and it's just too much trouble to face a whole summer of that if they start doing it in early June, which is why you still see a lot of silence. But again, for so many different reasons across the board, it's just going to be a very tough place for them to be. Like Tom Tillis of North Carolina, his Democratic governor has seen his approval go up in the pandemic. What's happening now? Trump's trashing him and taking as much of the convention, the Republican presidential nominating convention, out of North Carolina as he can. So they're in a horrible place, but I just don't expect a lot of independent thought from them probably until August or September.
Interesting how much the landscape's changing here week to week. AB, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, when we come back, we just talked about some of the problems Republicans are having. Well, some, they're not biting their tongue. Republicans vocally coming out against their president, how a growing number of voters and big-name members of the GOP now rallying against the president. A woman who's leading that movement, she'll join me after the break.